He confessed in great detail. He was brought to the Southern District of New York. They introduced those confessions at trial. He was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment. Post 9/11, the idea of rendition is to take people out of the system. You pick them up in Pakistan and you send them to a CIA black site or a third country that practices procedures that even we would, that this administration would describe as torture. And the last example, of course, that I would give that differentiates the pre- and post-9/11 conceptualization is trials. And of course, Bruce mentioned this. Before, we used to try the major terrorism cases in the Southern District of New York. We had a finely trained group of prosecutors and FBI agents, some of whom spoke Arabic. They knew the language, they knew the culture. They were experts in it the way the FBI used to be experts in the mafia. They have a record of uninterrupted success. Every single case they pursued there, terrorism case they pursued there, was successful. And now we see what they have instead is the military commissions. One example that Bruce didn't mention that is a particularly apt illustration of the inappropriateness of these commissions is the trial of the 5th guy that they're seeking death against down in Cuba. He is charged with participating in the embassy bombings. The embassy bombing case was already tried in the Southern District of New York. It's the same set of allegations. We don't have to compare apples and oranges. We know we can convict someone based on that conduct. We've already done it for the 4 defendants who were convicted in the Southern District of New York and, in fact, were sentenced September 12th, 2001 to life imprisonment. Let me talk a little bit about the implications of a wartime conceptualization, conceiving of this as a war instead of as a crime. They are profound. One, the obvious one, is the heavy-handedness, the clumsiness of responding to what is essentially the criminal problem of transnational terror by actors in discrete locations all over the world, responding to it as a military problem. And here I am reminded of the great First Amendment scholar Zechariah Chaffee, who said that a saw is a very useful tool, but not to shave with. There are legal consequences to this kind of conceptualization. There are diplomatic consequences that are profound. There are moral consequences. But I want to focus in on one thing. War provides a safe haven for exceptionalism. And what I mean by that is that when we think we are at war, and when policymakers convince the public that we are at war, we give them space that we otherwise would not indulge them in. And so what I mean by that is this. When we think about law enforcement, the enforcement of a criminal statute, you recognize the branches of government are engaged in that action. So for instance, you recognize that Congress passes a criminal statute, the executive administers that statute, they execute the law in the language of the Constitution, and the judiciary interprets the statute and presides over a trial where the person is represented by someone who is outside the government and the fact finder is independent of all of the above. You engage the branches of government in its entirety. But in war, it really is true, or it becomes true because we accept it as true, the old Latin saying that in war, the law is silent. And that is the difference. We recognize, we allow, we perceive that when you conceptualize something as war, all bets are off. And we have seen that happen. By and large, notwithstanding the victory in Rasul, notwithstanding the fact that the Bush administration has been woefully unsuccessful in the Supreme Court in their post-9/11 terrorism detention cases, the judiciary has been extraordinarily deferential and has not held their feet to the fire. And if the judiciary has been deferential, Congress has been positively pusillanimous. It has been an embarrassment. It doesn't matter whether they're Republicans or Democrats. It doesn't matter whether it was before the Democrats were the majority party or when the Republicans, as Bruce makes clear, congressional pusillanimity is not a partisan preference. The second vehicle is secrecy. Bruce talked about this a little bit less. To my mind, certainly with this community, there is no need to belabor the danger of secrecy. I would say that the most potent threat to a free society is not war, it is ignorance. But these two weapons operate hand in glove. These two vehicles operate together, and that is their real impact. Because secrecy ensures that people will not know the truth, and war ensures that they will not care. And that is the real problem. And if that is successful, that people do not know, and about which they know they do not care, then Dick Cheney will go down in history as the most successful vice president in history. Yet, of course there's always a yet, I remain hopeful. Perhaps I would simply remain naive. I'm hopeful because I'm not particularly well informed. That must be the explanation. I think I am well informed on this issue, and I remain hopeful. If the greatest threat to our democracy is ignorance, the greatest promise is its people. It is not our institutions. It is democracy's people, particularly these people. Because while in war the laws may be silent, the people are not. And I want to talk about one thing that I have perceived, and it is what I cling to since we began the detention litigation in February of 2002. We filed Rasul February 19th of 2002. When we filed, a motley, bearded group of us, I was co-counsel with lawyers from the Center for Constitutional Rights in New York, and one of my other co-counsel was a lawyer who was living and practicing. He was a death penalty lawyer in New Orleans. Just as a measure of where we were at that time, I was based in Minneapolis at the time, co-counsel was in New York, other co-counsel was in New Orleans. We needed local counsel in Washington, D.C. We could not get a firm to appear as local counsel for us 6 months after 9/11. They didn't have to do anything, all they had to do was put their name on it and appear as local counsel. We couldn't get the local affiliate of the ACLU to act as local counsel. One of my co-counsel, the fellow in New Orleans, received a death threat when his name appeared in the paper at his home in the middle of the night. I have to say, first to say, I never experienced anything like that. I occasionally get the angry crank email, happens with some frequency, but I've never experienced anything like that, and nothing like what people on the inside who were whistleblowers, what they had to endure. Nothing like that. But from that time, when we were at best ignored and at worst reviled for what we were doing, a narrative has developed. A dominant cultural narrative has begun finally to develop over the years, which is now, when you stop to assemble all the pieces of that narrative, is really remarkable for its breadth and its depth. The extent to which disparate and significant communities have now come out against various aspects of the administration's detention policy. And just to be clear, let me make sure everyone understands what I mean when I say the detention policy. The idea of the administration was to claim the power to grab people wherever they perceive them to be. As Bruce said, the war knows no temporal or spatial bounds, everywhere and anywhere, and hold them for as long as they see fit, under any conditions that they may devise, so that they may conduct whatever interrogations that they think are appropriate in order to extract the intelligence that they think that that person has. That's it. That's the policy. It is not, I want to tell you, an entirely irrational judgment at the time they made it. It has produced disastrous consequences. It is morally bankrupt. It is legally bankrupt. But the conceptualization, we want to conduct interrogations that are free from distraction so that we can get whatever intelligence this person has, that's not an irrational judgment. I, in fact, will say that it's not even a venal judgment. What has gone so horribly awry is the persistence in it. And it's the persistence in the face of this growing and expanding narrative.